You are listening to the Primitive Intelligence Podcast, episode 510, Ancient Civilizations and Ancient Maps. That's a working title. I just came up with that off the top of my head because that's what we're going to talk about. I had to throw out that whole bunch of, we'll talk about that in the beginning of the episode, but all the research that I was doing that I had to throw away, which sucked. And
that's a shame.
Yeah, and you're still working on your story, your segment, and which I'm excited to hear about. But we're gonna let that go one more week, let you get that all together, and then we're gonna jump into this one that is absolutely thrown together. I've been reading and doing research as we were getting the stream ready because I was completely unprepared because of having thrown out all my research for 2 weeks. But it works out. So without any further ado, episode 510 of the Primitive Intelligence Podcast starts
now.
Got it good that time.
That's it. There you go.
So we were talking earlier. I'm a little bit disheartened right now because I spent 2 or 3 weeks, not straight, but 2 or 3 weeks of research. Today I just threw right in the garbage.
That's unfortunate, isn't it?
It sucks because that's a lot of time, and it was shaping up to be really interesting. And without getting too much into it, because I really don't want to give I don't want to give any additional power to whatever the hell was going on with this. But I was approached by someone for an interview, and as I tend to do, I go through my research, and I researched the information I was given. I started to research the person, and I started to research parts of the story. And it led me down a very, very dark path.
That's not good.
No. The story is kind of... Well, I guess the story itself isn't all that lighthearted, but it's kind of wrapped in a lighthearted shell. But the source of the information is a very dark, disturbingly dark source. And I couldn't very well do the interview with this person and not bring this up. And I don't want to attack anybody. I mean, we got to think about what we want the podcast to be. I want it to be entertainment. I don't want it to be, we're going to cover dark topics at some point that are maybe not that dark, but
but you have to go with your gut. If it's not feeling right and it just feels too heavy, then
yeah. I mean, you know the part of the story behind what I was looking into, and I mean we've talked about other things where it's like initiation. People are being initiated into something, and that's what this seems like. Like the source of this information is trying to initiate people into, I don't know, maybe a cult of some kind, but a belief system that and ideals and actions that just I don't want any part with. I don't want anything to do with it whatsoever. So I just tossed it right in the garbage.
It happens. But the older I get, and I told you I used to listen to a lot of different music, and then I found that at night sometimes I'd be dreaming and some of the music would come through, and it's just weird. The older I get, the more I realize that what you consume, it's there. It's a part. It starts to become a part of you, you really need to be aware. Everyone does of what's in your surroundings, what you're engaging with. What you're consuming, whether it's entertainment or whatever it is, and because it'll stick around for a while, even if it's just rattling in your head or in your dreams.
Yeah, and I don't want to put that into anyone's head. It was dark. I went back and forth in this for about, I don't know, 3 days on what I wanted to do, and I was kind of in my head going through how to approach. Even if we had gone through with it, I would have had to be up front before we even started anything with this person and say, look, this is where my research led me, and if you're not comfortable talking about this, then we just won't. But the more I listen to other things that this person has spoken on, other podcasts and other things like that, that it's just kind of glossed over. And I couldn't do that. And I don't, like I said, I don't want to be antagonistic. I don't want to have someone on that feels like they're being attacked. So, yeah, I just figured the best thing was I kind of ran it by you earlier, like, hey, look, this is what I'm thinking of doing. But you just basically reinforced what I was already thinking. It didn't feel right and shouldn't do it.
Yeah, a lot in life has to do with how you feel, what your gut's telling you. Got to go with it. Got to trust yourself.
Yes. So instead of that, I was hoping to do your thing this week, but you're still getting everything together, and I'd rather you have it coherent, and we'll just use that for what we were going to, not coherent, but cohesive. You're rarely coherent, but yeah, I'd rather you have that together. We'll do that in place of what I was going to do. And This week we'll do something lighter, like the demise of civilizations. How much fun is that?
Are we talking the apocalypse or just, the end of civilization?
Well, it's not our civilization, but civilizations.
Okay.
So last week I was out hiking with Dragon and Matt and Shadow, and Shadow and I were talking about just about the podcast, about some of the things that we talk about and different points of view and things like that. And he turns around. Go ahead.
For those who don't know, those are some of those are hiking names.
One of those is a hiking name.
Yeah. Well, so yes, that's one of those. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nicknames.
But Shadow turns around and he goes, "What about these these ancient maps that show Antarctica?" And I was planning on doing something bigger with this, and I was like, "Well, you bring me some maps, and we'll get you on a podcast. We'll talk about it." But I started looking into it, and it wouldn't be worth doing a whole thing about it. But do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't know where you're going with it, but I will say that what has intrigued me are how some of the very, very old maps show Antarctica, and then some more recent maps we didn't see it. So it seems as though, at least I don't know the maps I'm talking to or I'm referring about.
But did they show Antarctica?
Well, and that's what you don't know, because a lot of map makers would rely on previous maps. So who's to say where things actually evolved from?
I'm to say. I got the information right here.
Oh, good. Is it on the internet?
It is actually. So the map I'm talking about is the Piri Reis map.
Okay.
This was uncovered in 1929 in Istanbul at the Topkapi Palace. I probably murdered that. The map was drawn and signed by a Turkish cartographer, Piri Reis, and is dated back to 1513 AD. So pretty old. Now, he was an admiral in the Turkish Navy. He was an experienced sailor, a cartographer, and he claimed to have used 20 different sources to make this map, including 8 Ptolemaic maps, 4 Portuguese maps, an Arctic, Arabic map, and a map from Christopher Columbus. Now, the map was interesting in a lot of ways because it didn't use it wasn't a map like we would picture a map with latitude and longitude. Those measurements, those guidelines hadn't been invented yet. So it used these. If you think of old maps, you see like these like almost like rosebuds with lines coming off them.
Okay.
They depict it like wind currents. I think they're called like wind lines or something like that. And that's what this used. It appears to show Antarctica on it. You know, it shows Africa, and then south of Africa, there's a landmass, and then there's also the coast of South America as well. But Antarctica hadn't been discovered yet. It wouldn't be discovered for another 300 years after the drawing of this map, and it appears to have shown Antarctica without its ice, which would be 6,000 years before that. So when it was found, people were like, this clearly shows Antarctica. Like, you can see it. It shows Antarctica. People started to research it and see what they could find. And there were other ancient maps that showed a landmass at the southern pole. It was nothing new, but this clearly seemed to show a coastline, islands, and information. So in 1929, a professor from the University of New Hampshire, Charles Hapgood, him and his team, is like his students, they researched this map, and they noticed this map uses what's called mercatorial projection. And this is how we get like our modern day maps, where you take a globe and you open it up to a cylinder and you create your map, and then you open it up.
Okay.
All right. Now, mercatorial projection didn't really come about for another 50 years after this map was made, but they realized that there were ancient Greek maps that used a similar process. It wasn't as accurate, but it had been done by the Greeks. So it lended a lot of credence to the fact that this map really was what it said it was and when it was from. But now the article I read on this really kind of jumped, because at some point this professor somehow comes to the conclusion that the data sets that this Piri Reis used were 4,000 years old. Like, there's no line to get to that jump. It just is like his team looked at it, 4,000-year-old data. But what this would imply is that the map sources and the data points that he used were created by a civilization that predates everything that we know, and was able to do highly detailed aerial mapping. Because like this guy's like, oh, the interiors are mapped too clearly. This had to be done from the air. They had to be able to map a globe. They had to have all this technology.
Yeah. So where are those maps? If anything, if that actually existed, and if that happened, was there just one guy? There was one map laying around, and this guy, and Piri Reis goes, "Hey, I could use this." Like, where, unless burned in a library at Alexandria, but
that's possible,
right?
But I mean, Piri Reis never said he used this stuff. He used maps from, which is interesting for that time period. And I mean, so his Muslim name is here too. I didn't even attempt to try to pronounce it because I would have not done it justice. But a lot of Muslim cartographers did not go outside to find sources. So this map is unique from that standpoint, that he was not afraid to go and get ancient Greek maps and, a map from Columbus and all these other sources to build this map. He wanted to make the most accurate map regardless of where the data came from. Right. But there's some interesting things about the map that show that like sections, they translated the text on it, and some of the spots are like, this area is very cold and rugged. The Portuguese infidels would not go there. Like things like that. So like he used the data
different
points,
time.
Yeah, he wasn't happy.
Different
about
time,
it.
Different language. Yep.
Yeah. But yeah, so this started to lead to speculation that it was a super civilization that predates everything, and people jumped to Atlantis.
Of course,
or ancient aliens.
All right.
And this is from this professor. New Hampshire professor in a book he wrote stirs all this up. But there's a much more common sense explanation for this map. And it did not take me long to find information and go, oh, here's what's going on. Now, I'm not a Rhodes Scholar or anything like that, but looking at the information that other people have obviously gone out and found and looking at it and going, oh, this makes more sense. So there's some interesting things about the map. Like I said, there was sections of the map that have been translated, and it said, it described the areas of the map, but it also showed images of monsters alongside common animals. So there's one where it's like this dude with no head, like where his neck would be, it just goes straight across, and it looks like it's on fire, but his torso is a face, and he's holding flowers, but there's a monkey sitting next to him. Like, oh, what? There's like
what
references.
Could that possibly be?
I have no
Firehead.
idea. Yeah, but then there's references to like one-horned mountain goats, like unicorns, long-haired, ape-like creatures on this continent. Sasquatch?
I mean, where do we think they might have been talking about? Do we have any?
I think it was legend that the local people were telling him that was probably mistranslated. And then it was written down, and then 500 years later, somebody else translated it in English, and it just doesn't make sense. It has no bearing on the map. It's just interesting that it was on there. The other interesting thing is that the area showing the Caribbean, especially Cuba, was misaligned badly. And there is evidence that some of Christopher Columbus's maps of the Caribbean were aligned this way, because when he sailed to the Caribbean, he thought he had made it all the way back around to Japan. He was not expecting to run into North America. Right. He thought he had gone across the ocean and he was coming back to the east. So he has like Cuba. When you look at a map of Japan and Cuba, it's almost identically orientated. So it's like he thought he was in Japan, approaching Japan, drew out the map, and then Piri Reis copied that map and put it in there. But with that kind of a omission or a mistake put into the map, what other mistakes could possibly be made? Because the way this map is laid out, Antarctica would have to be connected to South America by a land bridge, because it's a consistent coastline down South America and then around south of Africa. There's no ocean there. There's no Strait of Magellan. It's just all land, which to me would say he never actually went to any of these places. He was just piecing maps together. Right. And somebody at some point sailed so far south and went, oh, this must connect. Or got turned around and thought the coastline connected, or just kept going. And since no one had gone down there to see this continent at the South Pole, just assumed it must connect. Ancient maps, like in antiquity, used to show a landmass at the South Pole. It was called Terra Australis, the southern land. And this is where people see the Piri Reis map, and then they see these old maps from antiquity, and they see this landmass down there, and they say, Antarctica was there, it had no ice, this must be true. The problem is, Terra Australis was only ever hypothesized. It was rumored, it was written about, and it was mapped without ever being witnessed. And the reason why they assumed it was there was to counterbalance the mass of the land to the north. That is the only reason they thought there was land at the South Pole. They'd never been there. There was no legend of it. They just said, well, if there's this much landmass in the northern hemisphere, there must be this much in the southern hemisphere. So all these old maps from antiquity show completely different sizes and shapes of landmass down there. Now, ultimately, they were right. There is a continent on the South Pole, but it's not this Terra Australis. It's Antarctica under miles of ice. So I think these maps from antiquity, these other maps that were this guy showed this Terra Australis. He just connected the dots. Then we've already got the Caribbean that is completely wrong because it's orientated like Japan would be. So how could he? Why would that not be the case with the South Pole? So I don't think it shows the continent to the south. I don't think it shows Terra Australis. It just shows what people thought should be there, and maybe that's why that map never really made it. It was hidden for centuries because it was wrong. This isn't the map we found on the wall.
Just to think about, and again, if we're talking about map makers, we're talking about a profession unto itself at the time. Yeah. But like as you said, it's doubtful that they were actually traveling. They were making maps, and they must have been using resources. So it makes you wonder what they relied on and how they gathered their information. To me, it's kind of fascinating because you're talking about gathering or creating a network of information and basing that on what you're doing without anything that we have today. You're talking about word of mouth, stories from sailors, maps from people who are adventuring. That's all there was. So you'd have to be gathering this information and going to possibly other libraries or scholars and just trying to piece it all together.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, regardless, they were incredibly accurate maps. Even though they were wrong in some instances, the mapping of the time was incredibly accurate. I mean, the scale may have been off and some of the orientations of places may have been off, but considering they didn't have the technology that we have today, and they were relying on basically navigating by the stars, and like they didn't even have, I don't think they had sextants really. I'm not sure what they used. They just traveled, they used the stars. Imagine telling someone today, here's a stick, a string, and a boat. Go find me a continent. Oh, and it's a wooden boat that relies on wind. So here's a couple gold pieces and an orange. Have fun.
Again, I'd like to. I would really like a visual of what it was like thousands of years ago without any light pollution in the middle of an ocean on a clear sky. Like, what could you? I mean, just the amount that you probably could have seen would have been fascinating. Like once your eyes adjust, it could have been
adjust from what? There's no light. That's what I mean. Like there's not cell phones though. But imagine that though, and what you're looking at. You're not just navigating by points of light. People think like, oh, you're going to navigate by a handful of stars. I mean, you've seen dark skies. When we were in Acadia, you saw what that sky was like, and that was nothing compared to what they could see. So it was like looking at a forest. It was probably much easier to navigate, to look up and be like, oh, you could see the actual strands of the Milky Way, and they could immediately look at it and recognize how it was orientated, where they were, and where they needed to go. So, I mean, it's incredible, but it makes sense. Like, I couldn't do that. I know that. I mean, I'm pretty good in the outdoors, but I couldn't do that.
And there was... I'm gonna run my mouth for a little bit here because I don't remember the specifics, but I do recall seeing a program about Native Americans. I don't know if it was on the American side or the Canadian side, but how they had stories, and some of their art, I believe, was found in Hawaii, if I recall correctly. And there were stories about how they launched their boats, and we're talking about, we're not talking about massive vessels with sails. They would launch their boats, and they would follow these birds that would fly, and then they would sleep on the water. Yeah. So they would just they would just follow these birds, and wrap your head around that, where you're just leaving one day, and you're like, okay, we're gonna go follow the birds and see where they go.
Yeah, you hear the geese take off, and you're like, get the boat, let's go.
Right. Well, let's go see what's out there. Yeah. And eventually people find a way. It's impossible for us to fathom doing something like that. Some people can't get to the supermarket without GPS today.
This is
and
true.
and these people were just jumping in the water. And again, you have no concept of weather or what would happen. You're just out. Once you leave, you're out.
And you don't know for how long. It's not like today, if you go, you're going to, to a couple states away, or even if you're getting on a boat and you're going to another country, you know how long it takes. You know where it is. They didn't know they didn't know if there was anything. They were just going. So they may have just they're either incredibly courageous, or life for them sucked so bad they're like, I'd rather fall off the face of the earth than stay here. They just went, or a combination of the two.
That's the thing. People were different. It was just so different back then. And to think that you were still able to gather that knowledge and pass it down, and eventually it would become part of a culture and then get passed along.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. Like today, like the things people worry about and talk about, and most people don't even, if you think about the concept of, like you said, you're just going to get in the car and go.
Yeah.
That's a road. That road's already there.
Yeah.
You might hit a dirt road if you're taking a shortcut.
But it's still a road.
Something. It's still a road.
Somebody's already been there.
I've had the conversation with people about being in the woods, especially if it's old woods. It's something that, that hasn't been logged in a long time. There are trees everywhere. Yeah. So if you think about even those people who are trying to, literally blaze a path, they're just walking over down trees and through swamps and over mountains, and they're just walking. They're out there doing it. And it's amazing to me that we as a global culture kind of got ourselves in a little pattern here where we know we have a routine and we're not worried about that because we don't have to worry about it.
Well, that's the nature of humans, though. We like our patterns, we like our routines. But with what you're talking about there, I mean, I think back to, and I should probably do an episode on this, but I spent a lot of time researching my great-great-grandfather on my father's side. And he came over from Germany in the 1850s as a young missionary, went straight to Texas, got off the boat, and they're just like, go that way, find Germans and preach to them. And it's like him and 6 other ministers that just walked through like 1800s Texas wilderness until they found congregations. They didn't know. And there's actually a quote from him in one of those books where he's like, I'm not an adventurer. I'm not a walker. This isn't for me. It was just funny because I go backpacking all the time, but like that wasn't for him. He didn't want to do that, but it was his job, and he went and did it, and they found their way. I mean, yeah, there was already people there, but there wasn't roads and cities like we have now. Like they built that stuff by hand as they were going.
And they found a way.
Yeah. But this map led me to an interesting question, though. What if it turned out that really was Antarctica? Like who could have made that? And and we've spoken about the possibility that modern humans aren't the first evolution of advanced humans. There's so much history. The Earth has been around for so long that I refuse to just disbelieve the idea that maybe not Homo sapien, but maybe another branch of humanity came before us and were advanced enough to get to where we are, or maybe even further. And then, catastrophe happened, or they left, or something happened, and it starts over. And then this because there's so many stories, so many ancient stories about cycles and, like mass extinctions and the seventh world, or the fifth evolution, or whatever. Like I'm not quoting any of those, but there's always these stories where we're just another iteration. Like it's happened before. It's going to happen again. And it led me to a book about lost civilizations. And it's actually called Lost Civilization, The Enigmatic Disappearance of Ancient Civilization That Still Mystify. And this is by Conrad Bauer. And I'm still about 90% of the way through, but I pulled a few of the civilizations that he talks about, and they're pretty interesting. Because I know you're going to talk about an ancient civilization next week, and I figured this would be a kind of a neat tie-in. I'm not going to touch on your guys, but the first group he talks about, and I don't think I've ever heard anybody talk about this when they're talking about lost civilizations, the Neanderthals.
Oh, interesting.
And it is interesting because I never really, like, what do you know about Neanderthals?
Well, I know the known evidence continues or let's just say the theories continue to evolve, and right. It sounds as though they were possibly smarter than us, and it looks as though humans have some Neanderthal DNA. So yes. They were close enough to us that they were intermingling.
Yes. They predate Homo sapien by a lot. Like they survived the last ice age. Like they were around, they came out of the ice. Literally they lived in the ice age. Most people consider them to be just cavemen. Living in a cave, beating something over the head with a stick and then dragging it in and eating it. But they were actually far more advanced than this. They didn't build houses, but they were able to fashion clothes. They could fashion tools. They had mastery of fire. It doesn't appear as though they used fire to cook, which is interesting. They just used it for heat. And they did exist alongside Homo sapiens. So we came, like in the last 40,000 years of Neanderthal is when Homo sapien appeared and lived side by side in the same regions, started to intermingle. 2 to 5% of modern human DNA is Neanderthal. And that's pretty, cool. That's pretty common. It's not like some people have it and some people don't. Pretty much everybody has 2 to 5% of Neanderthal DNA. So where this guy kind of leads is, did they die out from something? Because they were hunter-gatherers. They weren't farmers. They weren't, they didn't appear to have the forethought to store food. They went out, they found what they could find, they hunted what they could hunt, they lived meal to meal. Whereas Homo sapiens we would actually store food. We would raise animals for future use. Did they just die off because they didn't have enough food? The climate was changing. Their source of food went away, or are we still here? Is modern human, is Homo sapien just a combination of our initial offshoot, our initial ancestors, and Neanderthal, and they combined and they basically bred out of existence, but they're still in existence because they lived through us. So did they actually ever go anywhere?
That's an interesting theory. Clearly, clearly they survived to a certain extent because their DNA survives. Mm-hmm. So technically, they're there. It's interesting to me because everything we know, that's really all it is. It's what we know so far. So I think it would be completely plausible that if different tribes got together and intermingled, and then it's just the genetics that survived were what we consider current human.
Yeah. No, I don't have the information in front of me, but over the past month or so, there's been 2 discoveries that are fairly interesting. And the one is that they found, I can't remember, it's Homo habilis maybe? It's a offshoot of one of the early human ancestors that were thought to have no use of tools, basically just living at the base of a tree or in a branch. They found that they created structures. They used wood to create structures, so they could plan and build.
When you get cold,
well,
what are you
yeah,
gonna do? Yeah.
When you know, they look at, the way they determine the intelligence of these animals, of these creatures, of these early humans, is by the size of their brain cavity. And they go,
Right.
well, there's no way that they could have been smart enough to make a house, but it turns out that they were. And then there's another offshoot, I think earlier than that, where again, they were primitive, they lived off of instinct, they didn't know anything, and then they find caves where they lived, and there's bones of this, and I don't remember which branch of humanity it was, but they find their bones in this cave, and on the cave walls they find art, not drawn by modern humans, and they're just like...
Is that the painted cave in France?
It might have been in France, yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't surprise me, but it's...
this is
amazing.
why... This is why I... When you even myself, I catch myself doing it, but when you hear people talk, it's almost as if we convince ourselves that it's fact. It's like, well, it's only what we know. Like, we're woolly mammoths hunted by man. Well, yeah, there's evidence. We think we have evidence, but we don't really know other than, we saw some cut marks in a bone, so they must have been hunted. But we don't know. We're just guessing. It's all just scientific guesses. It's like we have no idea what actually was there. And the only thing we really know are the massive megalithic structures, because we could see them and we could analyze them.
Yeah.
But other than that,
we don't understand
kind of just
them.
Guesswork. No.
We don't understand.
No.
We don't understand how they were made. We don't understand why they were made, if there was more to them. And like you said, it's what we know so far, but we only know a small amount of what is available to us now from the past. And think about how much is lost that we'll never be able to find.
Yep.
It's amazing. And to think that, we could be the only ones that were smart enough to figure this out. Well, are we? Like, we're seeing other branches of human. We're finding the evidence now that they were intelligent, way more intelligent than anybody ever gave them credit for. So what makes us so smart?
Well, and that's what's weird is it's all about, again, where, for me, I'll get back on it, where it's how people live, and it's the thought processes that go into that life. And I've gone through a few rabbit holes lately, mostly on YouTube, where people seem to be confused about even some of the buildings in America and how they were able to have been built. Like these old buildings made out of stone, big structures, but we're talking current day structures. But people believe that we couldn't do this because it's not in our concept of reality, where if you had to build something, if you had to get something done, eventually you could figure it out. Things being realistic.
I also just saw a video of a girl who doesn't understand how you can breathe in a car because the doors are closed. So I don't have a lot of faith in what people see as a building and can't figure out how to make it.
Right. But it's our concept of time is, I think, different from people in the past. Like if you look at something like Machu Picchu, where these massive, or any of these other megalithic structures, where there's massive foundations that are carved and stacked, we don't know how long that was actually going on. We don't even know how long it would take to do that. No one's ever, as far as I know, really tried to replicate it, to see it.
I don't think so, no.
Right. So could we really do that? And if you think about it in this context, like if you and I, like if one of us was going to be able to build a house on our own, if we were in the wilderness, you wanted to build a cabin or a stone house, you could do it to a certain extent. And then 100 years from now, someone could come across the foundation. They're going to have absolutely no idea who we were.
Right.
And it's something, you know, a whole civilization could disappear for one reason or another. And we would really have no idea.
But we don't.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the point of this book I was reading.
Right.
we don't know.
We really have no idea.
In civilizations that were much closer to where we are now, the next one that he talked about, well, I skipped a few, but the next one I kind of touched on was Easter Island.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah. So Easter Island, if you don't know, is a fairly small island, but it's in a very odd place. It's like over 2,200 miles from the west coast of South America, and it's 1,100 miles from its closest island neighbor. It is remote. I did learn that the original name for Easter Island is Tepito Tehunas. No, I'm sorry. Tepito Tehunia. And it means navel of the world.
Oh, that's cool.
Nobody knows why it was called that. They don't know. They just go that it's the navel of the world, but they don't know why. Legend says that the original inhabitants, or at least original to what we know, inhabitants of the island, came there because their home island sank. And they're not talking about, like, immediately says, I'm not talking about Atlantis, but there was another island nearby where,
right,
like,
rising waters or waves
priest
destroyed it.
The priest came in and was like, "Get your shit, we gotta go," and they just left. They just got what they could and they left, and they wound up on Easter Island. Good.
What I think is interesting to me, because I'm basing this on my knowledge, and as a kid growing up, there was a lot of weird TV shows and things.
Yeah.
And you always heard about Easter Island, and you always saw the heads, and everything I knew all the way up until basically right now, as far as I'm concerned, everyone thought they were just heads to a certain extent. Mm-hmm. And now they've been excavating them, and there's a whole body.
There's whole bodies, yeah.
Everything
I knew about Easter Island up until I watched Departures was from Bugs Bunny.
I don't remember Bugs Bunny.
You don't remember? That's where the Easter Bunny lived.
Oh,
Easter Island. Well, it got its name Easter Island because it was discovered on Easter Sunday.
But what I think, though, like where I was going with that is, if you think about, and I guess here's a question for everybody should contemplate this: how fast does it take for an inch of soil to accumulate with no intervention, just by wind and normal course of action, right? So if you're talking about a massive stone sculpture, and over half of it gets buried in soil, but not just the statue, everything around it. There's soil everywhere. So how much time could possibly have passed for that to happen? Unless
they were buried intentionally.
Up to their necks?
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting.
I mean, they carved them and walked them across the island. Why would they not be capable of burying them?
Well, no, I always just assumed that if you were going to do that, then you would probably want them to, like, if it was, the point of it was to walk, then you wouldn't want to bury them because they're supposed to walk.
Well, so here's
as a spiritual practice.
Well, there's not a clear idea of what they actually represent. So what the statues, the moai, is that how it's pronounced?
Right.
Moai. So they're carved from stone that came from a volcanic crater on the island. And the legend says, like you said, that they walked across the island, right? That their idea was they walk across, they wander across the island, or they walk. That's how they got to their locations. The interesting thing is when people say that they're put near the shore as guardians, the weird thing is that they're not facing the water. They're not looking out for danger coming in. They're facing inward towards the island, maybe towards the volcano. Right. Some of them have hats, some of them don't. And yeah, they find them buried. Now, it takes a long time for soil to build up, but if you're on an island, that soil could have been deposited by a tidal wave. We're talking massive stones. They wouldn't most likely have gotten washed away, or there could have been a volcano. There could have been a lot of things that buried them, or they're buried intentionally. But the walking part, they figured out. They did walk across the island. And I saw this years ago. I saw a documentary on it, and this guy touches on it in the book. So this American team goes to Easter Island because they're like, we got to figure this out. They started finding the buried ones, and they can't figure out why they're buried. They can't figure out why they're not facing the water. They're facing away from it. And they can't figure out how they got from this quarry in this volcano like miles away to where they are, because they're massive. They're like 16 feet tall. They're huge. So they start looking at it, and they're thinking different ways, and maybe they rolled them. But they may have, but the island's been deforested. There's no, which is another weird thing when you think about how they're buried. Deforestation creates soil erosion, not soil accumulation. So it's just another weird part of this mystery. But they found out that the way they're cut and they're left when they're standing and in place is different than when they're cut and laying down. So they found that around the head, when they're laying down, there's grooves. And they were able to put ropes around in through those grooves and get 4 or 6 people standing around it and rock it. And the way the bottoms are curved, they actually start to do this. They rock back and forth, and they walk. They were actually able, this team was of like 6 or 8 people, was able to walk one of these old statues. An actual, like, moai. They were, like, the island was like, go ahead, we want to see how this is done. They got permission. They stood one up, and they walked it. And they went, this could easily be done for miles. Because the way they're balanced, you got enough people, you could actually keep it upright. And even if it fell over, it's not going to break. You just got to stand it back up. So they actually walked them across. But they still don't know what, like, if those are your ancestors that are protecting you, why are they facing you? Why do they have their back to any potential danger?
It's a good question.
Really bizarre. And then, like, only the ones that have, like, the red stone on the head, like the hat, are the actual ancestors that would be protecting or would be worshipped. And the rest of them are depicting something completely different. But they don't know what that could possibly be. When Europeans finally found Easter Island, there was thousands of islanders there. There was quite a few. They came back years later, and the numbers had dwindled, and they didn't know why, other than there appeared to have been a civil war between tribes of what they were calling themselves the short ears and the long ears. And now, I mean, there's not many people that live on Easter Island now. There's more people there now because more people are visiting it. But even when there's evidence that even when their society was much bigger and starting to go into decline, instead of finding ways to reforest the island, instead of finding ways to make food or better shelter, they focused on those statues. They just kept building them. And by ignoring everything else, their civilization started to decline. At least that's what they think. But what is so important about these things that you would let your civilization? Well, I guess maybe they're the ancient day equivalent of cell phones, because everything's crumbling, and in our society, and everybody just wants their freaking phone in their hand.
And I could understand if it has a spiritual significance, if there's people that are very, very spiritual or religious.
Yeah.
They would focus on this, but there had to be some people at one point who said, hey, there's no trees. We better think about what's going to happen when there's no more trees. But it all comes out of the same thing. It's like who you are as a person versus the collective. So you could be a free thinker. You could think what you want. You could even go try to reforest it. But if the majority needs that timber to do whatever they're doing,
yeah.
You're not going to win.
I don't think there's any real evidence of that timber being used. There's not like there's structures.
Well, and I guess I don't know the size of Easter Island, right? And I agree if it's not. I think at one point I saw a theory that they were talking about using the timber for rollers, and they were rolling the statues.
Yeah, but now that appears that's not the case.
But it's the same thing here in America, where if we need timber for houses or for fires, we're going to go out and get it. There are people who, if you live on the land, it's your land, you're going to try to maintain that because you want it to last. But if you're not actually living in that spot and you're just going to go take it, people have different thoughts on the need and what's right.
It's not big.
And I didn't think it was very big.
It's 14 miles by 7 miles, 63 square miles. So it's not a huge island.
But it's the same thing if you think about, let's say, Scotland. And everyone has ideas about, well, maybe not everybody, but if you try to visualize it, you can picture the island. You're not picturing a forest. And when, as far as my knowledge can take me, it's my understanding that eventually when we started to be, we were starting to do animal husbandry and have animals, you would need the room to graze, and animals that graze eat everything, and more trees went until eventually it looks like it is today. And now there are people who are trying to reforest it.
Yeah, but if they deforested a majority of the British Isles, they didn't disappear.
Right, that's true.
So what was different with Easter Island?
I don't know.
I see the point you're making, but it's happened in other instances, and it wasn't the end of their civilization.
So I wonder what the tipping point was.
The long
years versus the short years.
Yeah. Like, was it? Were they so fascinated with making these idols that they starved themselves to death? Did they just stop trying to grow food? And they're like, all the trees are gone, we'll just make some food. And then, we don't have any food. Well, let's keep making, they'll save us. Let's keep making them. We make enough of them, they'll save us. I don't know.
The humans do like to believe that someone's going to come and save them.
They really do. And now this one's a little bit closer to what I know you're working on, the last two. But the Anasazi. And do you know what the meaning of the word Anasazi is?
I knew it at one time. I can't remember it right now.
Ancient aliens.
No, it isn't. Is it?
I swear to God, it translates to ancient alien. Yeah. Now they don't know that means ancient, like space aliens, but maybe they came from somewhere else. They're like the old ones that came from another place. It's more likely what it means than like star people. But yeah, so it means ancient aliens. And the weird thing about the Anasazi, they were not a civilization in decline. From all accounts, all research, they were in their prime. They were extremely defensive or offensive defensive, I guess. They would build their homes on cliff sides in the cliffs. Their home, it was like modern day apartment buildings. Like a lot of the units they made looked almost the same as everyone else's. They had a lot of the same tools, a lot of the same baskets. Like everything was very like, this is how we're going to do it. And then they'd go to their home up in the cliff, and they'd pull their rope or their ladder up, and then they were safe and they could go about their lives. They built 30-foot wide roads. And I didn't have a chance. I was going to look into this before we got on the podcast, but you can see them from Google Earth apparently, and you can see them come up out of canyons onto mesas and up on top of mountains. And now they didn't have cars or vehicles, but they're assuming they used them to get materials down to build. I'm not sure what else they would use them for. Like, why would you make 30-foot wide roads if you didn't have a vehicle of any kind?
30-foot wide, I don't see a reason. Well, I mean, I can't fathom a reason unless you had traffic. Unless it was a trade route of some sort.
That's a lot of trade.
It is, but if you think about how, I mean, I guess it could be an organic transition from a small path to a 30-foot wide road. Like, I guess it could do that and just evolve and get bigger over time.
It may have been like a show, like what do you call that? Like look at me, look what we can do. Now they did have a lot of stone to get rid of because they carved their homes out of cliff sides. So yeah, maybe they start out with smaller paths, and then as they trade it with other groups, they were kind of in awe, or maybe even slightly intimidated by these stone paths they made. So they just start making them grander and grander, and it was like, you don't want to mess with us. Look what we can do. I don't know.
That could be.
Yeah, I have no idea. The interesting thing, though, is the petroglyphs. The petroglyphs show not just possible, but a very strong understanding of astronomy, down to the point where they don't know exactly what it's supposed to be, but it looks a lot like the Milky Way galaxy. Like they may have had an understanding of, like, it's like a spiral petroglyph that looks like the Milky Way. There's also drawings of figures that don't look human, and this is why people think that the alien part is, and this is why ancient alien hypothesizers like to think that they were just beamed up and taken away. But they weren't the only advanced civilization like that to just disappear. The Mayans, it happened too. We don't know what happened to them. Like they had everything was there, and they were gone. Now they didn't completely disappear though, because the modern day Pueblo Indians are their descendants, and they actually carry over some of their traditions and their practices. So that's pretty cool. But what happened to the rest of them? And why, like, would they just hop on the roads and walk away? Like, what happened?
Well, and something like a desert society, and again, I'm just guessing, but something where if you figure the world continues to get warmer, or if there's a change in the climate, maybe there's less food, maybe people just move on. Maybe they're nomadic. They just decide to go somewhere else.
Nomads don't make 30-foot wide roads and build houses and cliffs. But also, I can throw water on that idea, because that's in the Four Corners region of the United States. That's a high desert, but there are ample ponderosa pines and juniper trees that are in the area. And through records, they can find that when the Anasazi were there, it was very conducive to growing. The environment was not desert-like at all. It wasn't arid.
Right.
It was very wet, and they would have ample food. But if you're a nomad, you're not going to carve your house into the side of the cliff.
No, but what I mean is that maybe then it was, and then it just got a little bit harder and a little bit harder, and then people decided to leave. So maybe they just decided to, some of them.
Yeah, but where would they go? It's not like they were in the Four Corners region and then they moved over a couple 100 miles. They just disappeared.
That's the interesting part. that's what's gone. Interesting is that'll touch on my story for next time.
Okay, so I won't dig any deeper.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the last one, and I was just reading about this right before, so I got a little information on them, and you may touch on these, so let me know if you do. But the Olmecs.
No, not Olmecs. No.
Okay, so the Olmecs. Do you know what their name means?
No.
Olmec means the rubber people.
That's cool.
Now, in their region, rubber trees were abundant, and they traded rubber. So the Olmecs were very interesting. They created stone buildings. They didn't carve them out. They built stone structures. They created aqueducts. They had plumbing. They also carved these giant stone heads.
I know the stone heads. They're cool.
That are round, and they appear to be wearing some kind of like a helmet. And the author just says, "Is it rubber? Did they actually make like rubber?" Because imagine back then, if you could make a rubber like hat, that would baffle people. Like that would make you like, oh, what is that material? Like it's not skin, it's not hide, it's not wood. What is that? So they got these helmets. Now, before I even read the next line, immediately in my head, I went, "Oh, this is very much like Easter Island." They carved these giant heads, and they lined them up in like a guardian pose, and then they vanished. They also are famous for this sculpture that they have that's called Ancient Astronaut in a Spaceship, I think it's called. And it looks like, I know the sculpture, but it looks like this guy who's sitting down, kind of leaning over, and he's got his hands on like knobs and levers. And they don't know what it means. So it could be nothing. It could just be, and this guy makes the same point, this could just be some kind of like ritual, and he's sitting at a table, and it's just the way they sculpted it. It looks like he's in a cockpit, but he's just at like a table, like moving jewels around or something. We don't know. But
it's a cool sculpture.
It's a cool sculpture.
It's a cool, yeah.
But the key to that is it's not an alien. It's not like some weird creature. It's clearly one of them sitting at this thing. So it's like, did they have some kind of, I mean, they had aqueducts. They built buildings, right? Did they have some kind of gravity vehicle? Like something they could, they need to get stuff from, up the hill. Did they just get on this little cart and roll it down the hill, and that's what they're depicting? And he's got like levers to control the speed. Like it could be anything, but
could be anything.
They weren't.
We
idiots.
would never know. People think it's a spaceship. Though.
Well, when you want to see a spaceship, you're going to see a spaceship,
right? But it also could be, if you think again from a spiritual standpoint, could be somebody interacting with the heavens.
It could be,
or their ancestors, or the spiritual realm. You could interpret anything if you really focus on it.
Oh, it could be some kind of instrument, like musical instrument, for all we know. Think of like steel drums, like they sit out in front of you like that. And if they had something that was like stone, we've got ringing rocks in Pennsylvania. What if he's like hitting like rocks with sticks
right.
to ring it? Like, it could literally be anything. But if you're looking for, it's confirmation bias. If you're looking for ancient aliens, you're going to see that.
You're going to find it.
And if you say it's a guy in a cockpit flying a spaceship, and you look at it, you go, "Holy crap, that's a guy in his cockpit flying a spaceship." And then you could also think of a million other things it could be. But if you want to see an alien, you're going to see an alien. But there's another group that just disappeared. Isn't it the Olmecs? No, we've mentioned this before that we listen to Mysterious Universe. Weren't they just talking about the Olmecs and that some of their writing is actually Chinese? Was that the Olmecs they were talking about?
I can't recall, but I know it was mentioned recently.
Yeah, it was one of those ancient civilizations, and they were like, "Oh, like a guy from, it was like a Chinese guy, like scientist, and they were going to a museum for an exhibit, and they let him in without paying, and he's like, "Oh, I didn't pay," and they're like, "No, you're one of us. You're of Olmec descent," and he's like, "No, I'm not." And they're like, "Yeah, you are," and they let him in, and then he was looking at one of their, like a tapestry or something, and he was able to read what was on it, and it was like 1,000-year-old tapestry, and they're like, how could you read that? He's like, "Oh, it's Chinese." And you're like,
and the Olmecs are in South America, right?
Yeah, they're like the forerunners to like the Maya and the
okay,
the Maya and the Inca, I believe.
Okay.
So yeah, they came before them, so they're way far back. And there's a chapter on the Maya in there too, but I didn't even get to them. And that's just another civilization that was amazingly advanced. And going back to the Easter Island thing, how many temples of the Maya are just completely buried under soil? So how long does that take?
Right. And if you're just talking about wind and normal soil buildup, like some of those buildings, they have to actually dig them out and excavate, like literally excavate.
Yeah,
because they think it's a mountain, and then they start to dig it.
Yeah.
And
it's not like you're just dusting off with like a little feather duster. It's a little dirty. No, they're buried.
Right. Buried.
Now, one of the other things he did talk about, and I didn't touch on it because it was just like he doesn't put a lot of faith in it, but it was some interesting information. It was Atlantis. Because there is a lot of, like, Atlantis isn't just something that popped up in science fiction. We're going back to the times of Plato, where he was talking about this city of Atlantis that sank in the ocean. There's the what is that called? Have you seen? It's in the Sahara.
The Eye of the Desert.
The Eye of the Desert. Yeah, and that's really interesting, and because it fits the pattern. It's like concentric rings that come out. It looks like a city. There's like a spire, or what would have been a spire in the center, and people think that maybe that was Atlantis. Maybe it did get washed away, and then now, but it's pretty far inland to have been underwater.
But that's an interesting thought, because and
unless it sank in the sand,
you could find some theories out there. But one of the theories is that it didn't sink. Maybe it was a flood. So when it was washed away and sank below the waves, maybe it was an actual flood that came over.
It wasn't permanent.
It wasn't permanent. Yeah. And then there was also a theory I heard about where it was actually had to do with the glaciers and how the weight of ice and water can actually move and lift and raise and lower continents. And there was one theory about, well, maybe maybe that had something to do with it, and it actually the continent has been rising, I don't have the theory down, but there's a lot of people who are looking at that now because they're finding like salt water, they're finding evidence of aquatic life. I think they found whale bones out there in the desert.
Oh, well, they found microscopic sea remnants in like the Rockies.
Well, yeah, but I think when I say like whale bones, I don't think it's like fossilized. You know what I mean? I think it's old, but it's not ancient.
It's recently was underwater. Not recent as in like last week, but within the last few thousand years. Well, that's pretty interesting.
That could be a whole episode to itself. That Eye of the Desert.
That could be. That's really cool. The other area is basically the other side of the world, over by the Bahamas, is the Bimini Road, and that is, you can see that from Google Earth too, and that's a wide, what appears to be man-made structure that looks like a road, and it goes for like, all right, so it's not as long as I thought. It's not even a kilometer. I thought it was way longer than that. This doesn't say how deep it is. Of course, that's also information from Wikipedia. So, this says a half mile long. This is right from the Bahamas website. I'll put a link to that in the show notes so everybody wants to look at it. But it's not super deep. You can. I mean, there's sunlight on it in the pictures, coming through the water, so it can't be that deep. But I thought maybe what I read was initially wrong, but I thought they saw more evidence of it that went further than just like a half mile or so. I thought it was like 100 miles. They were able to trace it.
Be interesting if it was.
Yeah.
The only thing I heard was that it's possible that it could have been above water in the last ice age.
Now, that information just says it's a rock formation. It appears as though they've abandoned the idea that it could possibly have been made. But maybe just because they don't know. I'm not sure. But, I mean, there's a lot of interesting stories like that about old structures that we don't know anything about.
And that's only what we know about. What about all those people and civilizations that have come and gone and there's no evidence?
Well, yeah. Yeah. I mean, continental drifts. I mean, it's very easy for something to have gotten either wiped out by lava from an earthquake or a volcano, or, I mean, how many times do you see where structures were dismantled to make a bridge or something like that? Like, oh, well, we don't use that building anymore. We can use that stone to build this bridge, and they just take it down.
Right.
And it's like there's no significance to it anymore, so they demolish it. I mean, we do it all the time. We demolish buildings left and right. It'd be interesting to see what happens in the far future, or if any of our stuff it still exists, and another life form comes and they see like Disney World or something. Like, what do you think of that? Like roller coasters, and they're trying to figure out what the hell a roller coaster is.
If something happened like life without humans,
yeah,
I think all that stuff will be gone. The only thing that's going to really survive, I mean, the roads will last for a certain amount of time. It's like the ancient Roman buildings that they find, even in England. They'll be just digging in their backyard and they'll find a mosaic.
I mean, the Roman roads will last. I mean, our roads barely last like 6 months here. I mean, look at Prompton State Park. Old Route 70 goes right through the park, and I mean, we've been going there for 10 years, and that road is almost completely gone now. Like, I know it's there, but there's some spots where it was visible 10 years ago and it's gone now.
Right.
So stuff doesn't last that long. Our stuff, to think we're going to last forever because we built a building or, whatever, it's gonna be gone.
Yeah, it'll be gone. Except for where we went through a mountain to put a road in. There'll just be half a mountain gone.
And the plastic bottles, they'll be around forever.
And the plastic bottles. Yeah. Until something evolves to eat all the plastic, and then.
Well, they're actually finding that bacteria is evolving to eat plastic.
There you go.
There's a bacteria that is eating plastic now, which could be really bad because we got a lot of stuff that's made out of plastic. But if it decides to start eating stuff we're using, and all of a sudden your bumper falls off your car, what the hell happened? Uh-oh, my car's got plastic eating bacteria.
Yeah. The bacteria winds are coming through. Everybody lock up your windows.
Yeah, that'll be the next thing.
Then we'll be back to stone buildings and glass and wood.
Yeah. Well, did you hear that in New York where they've banned plastic straws and they're making people use paper straws again? The coating they're putting on the paper is toxic.
Yeah, it's toxic.
That's better. Save the environment but kill the people.
It's just amazing that when we were young, one of the things me and the kids in the neighborhood did was run around and collect bottles, because people would still litter. And they'd throw a bottle, or you'd find a bottle, and you'd turn it in for the deposit, and you'd get enough money for like candy and stuff.
You know what's sad about that? The money you get for a collected bottle is the same as it was 30 years ago.
Well, it's but they don't even make bottles anymore. That's the problem.
Yeah.
If we just went back to glass bottles and no plastic, and then just recycled the glass, like it's amazing in a lifetime, in less than our lifetime, how much has changed just because of the plastic.
But it's cheaper. They can make plastic cheaper and they can charge more for it.
Well, yeah. That's about it.
Yeah. Right? Because you can, like, you've seen how they make those plastic bottles. They start out as look like a little tube that you'd put like a sport drink in, and then they just heat it up and they blow air into it and it turns into like a balloon. It turns into a bottle. Then when it cools down, they put, whatever they want in there, and then, yeah, who cares? You throw it in the dump, and like you could probably recycle that if you really wanted to, but a lot of places, even where you recycle, the crap just winds up in the dump anyway. Like, how many rules are there? Did you get the letter? It had to be like 2 years ago when the local recycling center was like,
no,
you've got to make sure everything's rinsed, and you got to separate this one from that one, and then you got to do this, and you got to take the little plastic tabs off the top, and or we're going to start sending it back. And everybody's like, I don't even care. They're just throwing it in the garbage now because, like, recycling is a great idea. But when you make it so complicated that nobody wants to do it, it doesn't matter. I think it's in Arizona. What they do out there, I think they call it single stream. So all your garbage goes, like your normal garbage goes into one can. Anything that could be recycled goes into another. It doesn't matter what it is. Glass, plastic, paper, doesn't matter. It goes in another can. All that stuff goes to the state and federal prisons out there, and they let them sort it. Gives them something to do.
Makes sense.
And I was like, that's a great idea. Right. Instead of just sitting there. I mean, if you're in prison and you're trying to, like, get out, and you've learned your lesson, and you've served your time, and you're trying to do something better, it might not be glamorous work, but if you're showing you're willing to put the work in, that's a good way to do it. Anybody can push a cart around giving out books. That's what everybody wants to do, I think, in prison. I don't know. I know nothing about prison.
I know nothing about prison.
All I know for prison is what I've seen in movies, and it's always the guy wants to be the librarian pushing the books around in a cart.
I want to be that now. Not in prison, though.
No.
That'd be a nice job.
That'd be pretty sweet. I wonder if the neighborhood would allow that. If I just start pushing around a cart with books and going up and going, want a book?
Well, if you get yourself a shopping cart with a broken wheel and a bunch of plastic bags and talk to yourself, you'll fit right in.
In my town?
Yeah.
Yeah, you have no idea how many people I see just walking across town with a shopping cart. And then they just leave it. They never take it back.
Yeah.
And then they walk back and they get another. There's like shopping carts everywhere around here.
Yeah.
And it's not like they're living in them. They're too lazy to, like, get the little hand cart. Like, what, is that so hard? Or just carry your stuff. Get a wagon.
They give them away. The supermarkets give away free wagons.
Oh, yeah.
With every purchase.
And now people are mad because a lot of the supermarkets want to start doing, like, Aldi's and have the coin return. And people are like, I'm not paying a quarter for a cart. Well, you get it back when you're done. You stop leaving your carts rolling around. It's
a good idea. Make people responsible for their actions.
Yeah. Because they put those little auto locks on them now. If they have them over by your supermarket, but down here they got it's like an electric fence around the parking lot, and there's a little lever on the wheel, and if it goes past that marker, that lever drops down. It's like a boot. It stops it from rolling.
That's hilarious.
So yeah, I've seen that in Florida, because a lot of times it's weird. You think Florida's pretty flat. The parking lots all seem to be angled out towards the road, so you just see shopping carts rolling towards traffic, like barreling into the parking lot, and then it would get to that spot and they just stop and they'd a big they just come to a screeching halt. And I was like, what? How'd that happen? Like, oh, look, there's electric fence. Bet the Olmecs didn't have that.
Well, maybe that's what happened.
They all rolled away in the
Everyone took their shopping carts, and
they couldn't get any more groceries.
That was the end of civilization.
That's not right. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed it. That's all we got for this week. It was interesting. The end of civilizations and the Piri Reis map. That I was hoping it was going to turn into something bigger than it really did, but it seems pretty...
It was interesting.
It's interesting. It's a cool map. Have you ever seen it?
Here and there, I haven't seen it in a while.
It's a cool looking map. If you do get a chance, you could get a good copy of it, like a good picture of it. Look at like the coastlines and like the southern parts of what would be like South America, and look for the little monsters he has drawn in there. It's crazy. It's really neat though. Next week we're gonna touch on more ancient civilizations with your story, and I'm really excited to hear this.
It'll be fun.
Yeah, we're really excited to hear this. And then maybe I will start working on a segment of my great-great-grandfather. Because it's interesting.
That would be cool.
I mean, I've told you some of the stuff that I found about him. There's books that he pops up in, and it's like, who was this guy? Like, I know who he was. I got his picture hanging on my wall, but yeah, like, and I had to.
Yeah, that's a really interesting story.
Yeah, and I had to find that all out myself because, like, nobody in my family talks, so nobody knew anything about him. All right, I got nothing left, so that's going to do it for this episode of the Primitive Intelligence Podcast. See ya.